Renata Coleman was 34 years old when her husband of 11 years told her to be out of the house by the weekend. She'd found the shell company 2 days earlier, buried in his laptop between old invoices. An apartment she'd never heard of. A woman named Brianna, 27 marketing department. Monthly transfers straight from the company account Renata had built the books for. When she confronted him, Desmond didn't deny it. He told her the business was never really hers. She was support staff with a ring. He said his mother knew how to protect this family, something Renata had never learned. He had no idea Patricia's signature was sitting on those same shell company documents, dated 14 months earlier. He had no idea what Renata had already copied, quietly months before any of this surfaced. She packed one suitcase that night and said nothing. But nothing was about to become very, very expensive. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The kitchen smelled like coffee and ambition. Nita was already at the counter at 5:47 in the morning, one hand wrapped around a warm mug, the other scrolling through a spreadsheet she'd rebuilt from scratch 3 weeks ago. The investor projection deck for Coleman Build Group's Q4 pitch. 42 slides, every number checked twice. Outside, Atlanta was still dark. The neighborhood was quiet. The only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint tap of her fingernail against the laptop trackpad. She liked this hour, before the noise started. Before the day became about managing other people's confidence instead of doing the actual work. She moved through the slides slowly, the way a sculptor circles a piece before touching it. The revenue models were clean. The projected ROI on the Brookhaven mixed-use contract, the deal that had tripled Coleman Build Group's portfolio overnight, was formatted exactly the way institutional investors needed it to look. Direct, authoritative, trustworthy. She had built that deck in 11 days. She had cold-called 2 of the 4 investors personally, using relationships she'd nurtured for years at industry events, while Desmond worked the room in his tailored blazer, shaking hands and telling stories. That was how it worked. She built things. He stood in front of them. She had made her peace with that arrangement. At least, that's what she told herself most mornings. Desmond came downstairs at 7:15, still knotting his tie, phone already pressed to his ear. He barely glanced at the plate she'd left on his side of the kitchen island. Eggs, toast, sliced fruit, before he pulled out a bar stool and sat down without a word. Nita poured him coffee and returned to her laptop. No. Marcus, listen. Desmond's voice shifted into the smooth, low register he used for money conversations. Warm, sure of himself. That's exactly the kind of track record I'm talking about. 12 years of building something from the ground up. Self-made. No shortcuts. When you look at our portfolio, you're looking at my vision. Start to finish. Nita's fingers paused on the keyboard. She didn't look up. Self-made. She moved her cursor to the next slide. 12 years. She had been there for 11 of them. She had built their first investor template on a second-hand laptop in their old apartment on Flat Shoals. She had untangled the bookkeeping disaster that almost sank the company in year 3. She had drafted the partnership language for the Brookhaven contract because their attorney at the time missed a critical clause, and she'd caught it. She listened to her husband tell someone else the story of his life, and she was not in it. Absolutely, Desmond said, laughing at something the caller said. From day one. Just me and my instincts. The coffee was hot. She took a slow sip and said nothing. Patricia called at 8:30, right as Nita was stacking dishes in the sink. Just checking in, baby. Patricia's voice was warm on the surface, the way old wood looks solid until you press it. You two ready for the Henderson pitch this week? Almost, Nita said. I was actually just finishing the Q3 numbers before I pull the final deck together. The quarterly breakdown has a few things I want to flag before. You know what? I actually wanted to ask about Sunday dinner. Patricia's tone didn't drop. It just pivoted. Fast, like a door swinging shut. Are you thinking of doing that pasta dish again? Desmond mentioned it last week. Nita stood very still beside the sink. Patricia, I was just saying, the quarterly report has some line items I think we should... The pasta, Renata, with the roasted tomatoes. It wasn't rude. That was the thing about Patricia. She never raised her voice. She just redirected, firmly and smoothly, until the conversation became what she wanted it to be. Nita had learned to read it as old-fashioned deflection, a mother's habit of keeping the peace. Now, standing at the sink with water still running over her wrist, she filed the moment somewhere quiet in the back of her mind. Sure, Nita said. I'll make the pasta. She found it at 10:12. She wasn't looking for anything. That was the part her mind kept returning to, even hours later. She had opened Desmond's laptop purely to pull a shared client file, a site survey PDF she'd uploaded to their joint drive 3 weeks ago. His laptop was closer. That was all. The shared drive folder was right where it should have been. But the folder next to it was not familiar. Venture Path Holdings, LLC. Formation. Nita stared at the name for a moment. Her fingers didn't move. She knew every entity connected to Coleman Build Group. She had filed most of them herself. This one was not in her records. She clicked it open. Formation documents, an operating agreement, a lease, a residential lease, an apartment on the north side of the city, leased under a name she recognized. Her chest went tight, but her face stayed still. She scrolled, then she stopped. There, on the witness line of the LLC formation document, handwriting she had seen 100 times on birthday cards and Christmas checks. Patricia A. Coleman. Dated 14 months ago. She didn't move for almost a full minute. Just sat there, the laptop screen glowing in front of her, the cursor blinking beside Patricia's signature like a small, patient heartbeat. Then she scrolled. The bank records were attached to the formation documents in a subfolder labeled Operations, Monthly. Someone had been organized about it, methodical. The kind of clean file structure Nita herself would have built. She opened the first statement. Monthly transfers. Consistent. Regular as rent. Because that's exactly what they were. Coleman Build Group's main operating account. Routing number she knew by memory. Sending $3,400 every first of the month into Venture Path Holdings, LLC. 12 transfers over the past year. $41,000 total, moved quietly out of the company she had helped build into an entity she had never heard of, paying for an apartment she had never seen. The lease was in the name of Brianna Voss. Nita knew that name. 27 years old, junior marketer. Desmond had hired her 8 months ago. Nita had seen her exactly twice. Once at a company happy hour she'd briefly stopped by. Once in the lobby of their building when she'd dropped off lunch for a meeting. Brianna had smiled brightly and said, "You must be Desmond's wife. He talks about you all the time." Nita closed the laptop carefully. She sat with her hands flat on the kitchen counter, the way you put your hands flat on the ground when the room is spinning and you need to feel something solid. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. She just breathed. Then she picked up her keys. The apartment was in Buckhead, a newer building with clean stone facing and a parking lot edged with trimmed hedges. The kind of place that looked like it cost more than it was worth, which meant someone wanted the address more than the space. Nita parked across the street at 4:45 in the afternoon. She kept the engine off. She did not check her phone. She waited. At 6:22, Desmond's black Escalade turned into the lot. He parked near the entrance, got out, straightened his jacket. He was carrying a white paper bag, takeout from the look of it, and he was already smiling at something on his phone. He walked to the front door of the building with the ease of a man who belonged there. Didn't buzz. Didn't knock. He used a key. The door swung shut behind him. Nita sat across the street for another minute, watching the lit window on the second floor. Then she started the car and drove home. She was sitting at the kitchen island when he walked in at 10:50. The lights were on. The documents were printed, 9 pages laid in a neat stack on the counter in front of her. She had made herself a cup of tea and let it go cold. Desmond stopped just inside the doorway. Something shifted behind his eyes. Quick, like a calculation. "Hey," he said, easy and flat. "You still up?" "Sit down, Desmond." He looked at the stack of papers. He didn't sit. "I know what Venture Path Holdings is," she said. "I know what the apartment is. I know who Brianna Voss is, and I know you've been moving company money into that lease for at least a year." She paused. "And I know your mother signed those formation documents 14 months ago." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him decide something. Then he exhaled through his nose and set his phone face down on the counter. "All right," he said. Almost relaxed, like she'd finally found the homework he'd been waiting to hand in. "That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say, Nita?" He crossed his arms. "You want me to fall apart? Beg?" He tilted his head, and something cold moved into his expression. "This has been over for a long time. You just didn't want to see it." "What has been over?" "This." He gestured between them. "You running numbers in the background and calling it a marriage. You confusing being useful with being essential." The words landed clean and deliberate. She recognized the precision of them. He had said these sentences before, inside his own head, many times. "The business isn't yours," he continued. "It was never yours. The house is in my name. The accounts are in my name. You've been support staff with a ring, and I let that arrangement go on longer than I should have." She kept her voice level. "A lawyer. Already drawn up. Separate property filing. You'll get what you're entitled to, which is a fair exit, not a stake in something you didn't build." "I built most of it." "You helped." He said it the way you'd acknowledge someone who held a door. She looked down at the papers and then back up at him. "Patricia's signature is on the formation documents, Desmond. She's been part of this for over a year." He shrugged, a single loose roll of one shoulder. "My mother knows how to protect this family." His eyes settled on her without warmth. "That's something you never learned." She didn't answer. "I need you out by the weekend," he said. "I'll have someone bring boxes." She packed one suitcase. The accounts were locked. Her name was not on the deed. There was $70 in her wallet and a quarter tank of gas. She carried the suitcase to her car, put it in the trunk, and drove south through the city without the radio on. Yolanda's porch light was already on when she pulled up. It was 12 minutes past midnight. She sat in the car for a moment with her hands still on the wheel. Then she got out and knocked. Yolanda opened the door before Nita could knock twice. She took one look. The suitcase, Nita's face, the way Nita was holding herself. Spine straight, jaw tight, like if she loosened anything it would all come apart at once. Yolanda stepped back and held the door open wide. "Come in," she said. No gasp, no questions, just that. She took the suitcase from Nita's hand and set it inside. Closed and locked the door behind them. Then she went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. They sat at Yolanda's dining table, 2 mugs of tea, both still steaming. Nita had her hands wrapped around hers like she was cold, even though the apartment was warm. She told Yolanda everything. She went through it in order, the way she would have walked someone through a financial report. No skipping, no spiraling. The LLC, the formation documents, the monthly transfers. The lease under Brianna Voss's name. driving to the apartment in Buckhead and watching Desmond walk through the front door with takeout and a key. Patricia's signature, dated 14 months ago, the printed documents on the kitchen counter, Desmond's voice, support staff with a ring. His lawyer already circling, his mother already protected. When she was done, she picked up her tea and drank. Yolanda had not interrupted once. She sat with her elbows on the table, fingers steepled at her mouth, listening the way she listened in depositions, still and precise, taking everything in. When Nita set the mug down, Yolanda leaned forward. "Nita." Her voice was careful. "What he did to your marriage is one thing, but what you're describing with that LLC, the money moving out of the operating account, the formation documents, Patricia signing on as a witness, that's not a divorce. That's fraud." Nita looked at her. Diverting company funds into a shell entity to cover personal expenses, an apartment, a whole other life, using a business with marital assets tied to it? Yolanda shook her head slowly. That is misappropriation. That has legal weight completely separate from anything a divorce filing would touch. He said the business was separate property. He can say whatever he wants. That doesn't make it true? Yolanda's eyes were steady. A lawyer drafted paperwork. That doesn't mean it holds, especially not if the books show what you're describing. Nita was quiet a moment. "There's something else," she said. She reached down and unzipped the front pocket of the suitcase. Her fingers found it immediately, a small black flash drive on a plain silver keyring. She'd packed it automatically, the same way she'd packed her charger and her good pen. It had lived in her work bag for months. She set it on the table between them. "I pulled those files about 4 months ago," she said. "Not because of any of this. I didn't know about Brianna then. I didn't know about the apartment." She paused. "But the numbers had been off for over a year. Small things at first. Rounding errors I couldn't source, transfers with vague line descriptions, a contractor payment that didn't match any project I could find. Nothing I could point to directly, but enough that I started making copies." Yolanda stared at the drive. Professional habit. Professional habit. Yolanda picked it up, turned it over once, then stood and crossed to her laptop on the sideboard. They spent the next hour going through the files together. The closer they looked, the larger it got. The transfers weren't just consistent. They were layered, buried in operational line items, labeled as vendor payments, slotted between legitimate entries with just enough distance to avoid pattern matching at a glance. Someone had known exactly what they were doing. But Nita had built the filing system. She knew every folder, every naming convention, every shortcut used to build the documents on that drive. She walked Yolanda through it without hesitating. This account, that routing, this date discrepancy, that signature block. And as she talked, something began to settle inside her. These were her systems, her logic, her years of learning how to read a set of books and find the thing that didn't belong. Desmond had stood in front of her tonight and called her support staff. He had said she hadn't built anything, but she was the one sitting here at almost 2 a.m, walking a real estate attorney through documentation that was already 3 steps ahead of him. That wasn't nothing. That had never been nothing. It was hers. All of it, and it would still be hers tomorrow, and the day after that, regardless of whose name was on the deed, or what a lawyer had drafted, or how many times a man had shrugged at her across a kitchen counter. Yolanda was still reading when Nita's phone buzzed on the table. An incoming call. She almost let it go. Then she saw the name. Theo Bishop. She frowned. It was late for a business call, but Theo kept odd hours. She'd spoken with him a handful of times over the years, always about Coleman Build Group deals. He was sharp, understated, the kind of investor who noticed things other people missed. She picked up. "Theo." "Nita, sorry for the hour. Caught you? I'm up. They talked through a brief and genuinely unrelated matter. A contact he was trying to track down, someone she'd worked with 2 years ago on a commercial deal. She gave him the name and the firm. Then he paused. Actually, while I have you. His tone shifted, easy and curious. I've been thinking about this for a while. Why have you never started your own firm? Your read on those Coleman projections last spring? That was graduate-level analysis. You've got a skill set most people in this industry are faking. Nita looked at the flash drive sitting on Yolanda's coffee table, the little silver keyring catching the lamplight. Yolanda glanced up at her from across the room. Nita didn't answer right away. Then she said, Maybe it's time I did. The coffee was hot and strong, and Nita drank it standing at Yolanda's kitchen window first, watching the early Atlanta traffic build on the street below. A delivery truck, a woman walking a dog. The ordinary world moving through an ordinary Tuesday morning like nothing had happened. She was still in yesterday's clothes. She hadn't even thought about it until now. She sat down at the table. Yolanda came out of the second bedroom in a robe, hair wrapped, already carrying a thick folder. She set it down and went back for her own coffee, then returned and opened the folder flat on the table between them. Printed pages, bank statements, transaction logs pulled from the flash drive files and organized by date. I was up until 4, Yolanda said, sitting down across from her. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. She turned the folder so Nita could see the top page. She'd used a yellow highlighter on every transfer that matched the LLC's routing number. The page was almost entirely yellow. I want this documented right, not just the account numbers, the pattern, the dates, the amounts, the line descriptions they used to bury it. She tapped the page. Whoever labeled these as vendor payments was careful, but careful isn't the same as invisible, not when you have the master filing key. Nita pulled the page closer and scanned it. Yolanda was right. Laid out like this, printed and stacked in order, the transfers had a rhythm. The same rhythm as a rent payment. The same rhythm as someone covering a life. She turned to the next page, then the next. Around 9, she stepped away from the table, went to the window again, and called Theo Bishop. He picked up on the second ring. Nita, I was wondering if I'd hear from you. You asked why I never went out on my own. She kept her voice even. I've been thinking about that. You mentioned distressed commercial properties last month. The portfolio your firm flagged out of Buckhead and Midtown. A short pause. She could hear him shifting, getting focused. I did. I can analyze those for you. Formal projections, risk assessment, investor presentation materials. The same kind of work I've been doing for Coleman Build Group for the past decade, except this time you'd be paying me directly. Another pause. Shorter than the first. When can you start? I already started, she said. Send me the files. She sat up at one end of Yolanda's dining table, her laptop, a legal pad, her good pen. Yolanda worked at the other end, building the documentation package for the potential fraud filing. They kept a pot of coffee going between them and worked mostly in silence, which was the kind of quiet that had weight to it, productive and focused, not empty. The first property file Theo sent was a mixed-use commercial building in Midtown. Struggling occupancy, deferred maintenance, underwritten badly by the original lender. Nita opened the financials and felt something slot into place behind her eyes the way it always did when numbers were in front of her. She started reading. 3 years ago, Desmond had been in a meeting with a developer who looked at the same type of building and didn't know what he was looking at. Nita had passed him a note across the conference table, a single line of numbers, a corrected cap rate, and he had read it, recalculated, and walked away from the deal. Later, he told the room he'd caught the error himself. She had let him. She wrote her first projection note in the margin of the legal pad and kept going. On the 4th day, Yolanda looked up from her laptop with the particular stillness she got when something mattered. Come look at this. Nita crossed to her side of the table. Yolanda had the LLC formation documents open beside a separate window, a record search she'd been running through a property and business filings database. She pointed at the screen. I've been cross-referencing the LLC's registration date against the transaction history. Patricia's signature is dated 14 months ago. That's what you found. She moved her finger to a second document. But this is the original registration. The LLC was formed 3 years ago, Nita, not 14 months. Patricia signed on as a witness to an amendment. The entity itself is 3 years old. Nita straightened up slowly. Pull the transfer history from the beginning, she said. It took Yolanda 10 minutes to compile it. She printed it out and laid it flat on the table. 3 years of transfers, date by date, working backward from the present. Nita read down the column. She stopped at a cluster of transfers from 4 years back. They were larger than the regular monthly amounts. Irregular, but substantial, pulled across 3 weeks in the same month. She knew that month. She and Desmond had taken a trip to Portugal that year for their 10th anniversary. It had been expensive. The flights, the hotel in Lisbon, dinners she still remembered. She had offered to pay for it herself, using her own account. Desmond had waved her off. I've got it. We just have to be a little careful this year, financially speaking. She stared at the dates. He's been lying to me, she said, since before I even noticed I should be watching. The photo came up on a Thursday morning. Nita was on her second cup of coffee, working through a rent roll analysis for Theo, when her phone buzzed with a notification. A mutual acquaintance, a woman named Dana, who collected social media moments the way other people collected receipts, had tagged a restaurant opening in Buckhead. The caption said, "Big night out with beautiful people," and was followed by 3 champagne glass emojis. Nita tapped the photo. Desmond was near the back of the frame, turned slightly toward the camera like he'd noticed it, and adjusted on instinct. Dark blazer, fresh haircut. He looked easy, relaxed. His hand was at the small of Brianna's back, and Brianna was laughing at something, her head tipped back, earrings catching the light. She looked young. She looked like someone who had never lost a thing in her life. Nita set the phone face down on the table. She picked up her pen and went back to the rent roll. She wasn't going to give that photo more than the 10 seconds it had already taken. The settlement offer arrived by email that same afternoon. Desmond's lawyer, a man named Gerald Pruitt, whose firm operated out of a glass tower in Midtown, had drafted it in the kind of language designed to make a woman feel grateful for the insult. Nita read it at the dining table while Yolanda was on a call in the other room. The number was $42,000. A lump sum, one-time payment, in exchange for Nita waiving all claims to Coleman Build Group, the marital home, and any business assets accumulated during the marriage. A non-disparagement clause, a 30-day window to sign. The letter described her contributions to the company as informal support services and noted that her role had never been formalized through contract, salary structure, or equity agreement. At the very bottom, a single line. Given the limited nature of Ms. Coleman's documented involvement, this offer is being extended as a courtesy. She read that line twice, then she forwarded the email to Yolanda without a word of comment. 30 seconds later, Yolanda came out of the bedroom still holding her phone. She'd clearly dropped the other call. Gerald Pruitt, Yolanda said, reading the name at the top. I know of him. So do I. She scrolled to the bottom of the letter and read the last line. Something moved across her face. Not surprise, exactly. More like recognition. Informal support services? That's what it says. Nita, you wrote the investor deck that landed the Hartsfield contract? That project alone did $4.2 million in revenue. I know what I did, and he's offering you $42,000. I'm not signing it. Yolanda put the phone down on the table firmly. Good. because this letter is actually useful. It tells us exactly how scared he isn't yet." She looked at Nita directly. "We're going to change that." 2 days later, Yolanda found Donna Hicks. Donna was Coleman Build Group's former bookkeeper, not a senior accountant, not someone who had been in rooms with Desmond and his lawyer, but the woman who had quietly processed every vendor payment and transfer log for 4 years before quietly leaving the company 18 months ago. She had moved to a small accounting firm in Decatur. She had not signed a non-disclosure agreement when she left, because nobody had thought to give her one. Yolanda drove to Decatur on a Friday morning. Nita stayed at the apartment and waited. Yolanda came back with a 4-page signed statement. She set it on the table in front of Nita without any preamble and let her read. The statement was careful and specific. Donna Hicks had not known the full picture, but she had known the pieces she touched. According to her account, Brianna Voss had not stumbled into the shell company as a girlfriend who looked the other way. She had done the work. She had personally drafted the LLC's operating agreement, the founding document that laid out the entity's structure, its members, and the transfer mechanisms that moved money into it. To obscure where the document came from, she had routed the creation files through her marketing department's software licenses, tagging the project under a vendor design account that would look like a creative services invoice to anyone scanning the expense log. In exchange for this, Desmond had promised her verbally, in Donna's presence, during a Friday evening at the office when Donna had stayed late, a 15% partnership stake in Coleman Build Group once he sorted things out with Nita. Those had been his exact words, according to Donna Hicks. Sorted things out with Nita. Nita read the statement to the bottom. Then she turned back to the first page and read it again from the top. She set it down flat on the table. The photo from Thursday morning came back to her. Brianna laughing, earrings catching the light, not a woman who had been swept up in someone else's choices, a woman who had sat down, opened a laptop, and built the structure that buried Nita's future in the paperwork. "She didn't just take my husband," Nita said. Her voice was quiet and even. "She helped build the thing that stole my future." She looked up at Yolanda. "She answers for that, too." Theo Bishop's office was on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown, the kind of space that told you everything about who occupied it without trying to. No art on the walls meant for impressing people, no oversized desk, just clean lines, good light, and a conference table that had clearly seen real work done on it, coffee rings that hadn't been polished away, folders stacked at one end, a whiteboard with numbers that hadn't been erased from the previous meeting. Nita noticed all of it when she walked in. Theo stood when they entered, shook Yolanda's hand first, then Nita's. He was tall, quietly dressed, with the kind of stillness that came from not needing to fill a room. "Sit wherever you're comfortable," he said. "I'll get straight to it." They sat. Theo opened a folder on the table and turned it toward Nita. "I've been looking at the analysis you sent me on the West Side portfolio," he said. "The rent roll projections, the deferred maintenance estimates, the cap rate breakdowns." He paused. "You already know what you have here." Nita looked at the pages. She'd put them together in 3 days, working from Yolanda's dining table in yesterday's clothes, running numbers that had come to her the way they always did. Cleanly, quickly, without hesitation. "Those properties are bleeding," Nita said. "Whoever's been managing them stopped paying attention about 18 months ago. The maintenance reserves are nearly empty. 2 of the leases rolled over without renegotiation, and the anchor tenant in the Marietta Street building has a 90-day exit clause nobody exercised." "That anchor tenant already gave notice," Theo said. "Last week. Which means the building's value just dropped on paper, and whoever owns it is going to want out fast." Nita already knew who owned it. The Marietta Street building was one of 4 commercial properties tied directly to Coleman Build Group's operating portfolio. assets Desmond had expanded into during the company's peak years, when Nita's investor work had kept the capital flowing. She had never been listed on the ownership documents. She had simply been the reason the money was there. "These 4 properties," Theo said, tapping the folder. "I want to structure a fund to acquire them at distressed pricing. I've got 2 other investors ready to participate." He looked at Nita directly. "But I want you as the managing partner on the operating side. Your analysis, your relationships, your name on the door. This is the founding portfolio." The room was quiet for a moment. Yolanda, sitting to Nita's left, did not say anything. She had already told Nita on the drive over that this meeting was Nita's to run. She was there as counsel, not as a voice. "What does the structure look like?" Nita asked. Theo slid a second document across the table. Clean, straightforward, an outline of the proposed terms. Nita read it the way she read everything, from the top, without skimming. It was fair. More than fair. "You'd be carrying 30% equity from day one," Theo said. "No earnout, no probationary period. I've watched your work for 3 years, Nita. I'm not offering you a trial run." She set the document down. "I'll need 3 days to review this with Yolanda before I respond formally." "Take the time," Theo said. "The acquisitions won't move before end of month." He refilled the coffee cups without being asked, and they spent the next 40 minutes working through the property details. Market comps, tenant histories, renovation timelines. Nita drove most of it. Theo asked sharp questions. Yolanda took notes on her legal pad, flagging 2 title issues worth investigating before any offer went in. By the time they stood to leave, the folder Nita carried out of the room felt different from the one she'd brought in. Heavier, somehow. Real in a way the last several weeks hadn't felt. They were back at Yolanda's apartment by early afternoon. Yolanda went straight to her laptop. She had been in the middle of a document search the night before, running a cross-check on the LLC formation records against the original county filings, and she'd left it open when Theo's call came in that morning. Nita was at the table reviewing Theo's term sheet when Yolanda went very still. "Nita." Something in her voice made Nita put the papers down. "The original filing for the LLC was logged with the county on March 14th, Yolanda said. "That's the version we have on the flash drive. Patricia's signature is on page 4 as a witness." "Right. The current version in the county system was uploaded 9 days ago." Yolanda turned the laptop around so Nita could see the screen. "Page 4 is different. Patricia's signature line is gone. It's been replaced with a notary block that wasn't in the original document." She pulled a second window open and placed them side by side. 2 timestamps, 2 versions of the same page. "She met with Desmond's lawyer and had herself removed." Nita stared at the screen. Yolanda was already at the printer. 2 pages came out. She set them side by side on the table, the original beside the amended version, and slid both across to Nita with one hand flat on top of them. "She tried to disappear herself from this," Yolanda said. "Now, we make sure she can't." The name came to Nita on the second morning. She was sitting at Yolanda's kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee and Theo's term sheet in front of her, a legal pad beside it with notes from the night before. She'd been turning it over in her head since the meeting. What to call the firm, what the name would carry, what it needed to say without saying too much. She wrote 2 words at the top of the pad, Voss Capital. Then she crossed it out. She wrote something else, something that was hers alone. No borrowed name, no echo of Coleman, no trace of anyone who had tried to define her. She looked at it for a moment, then circled it. That was the one. She called Theo at 8:30. By 9, Yolanda had begun the state filing. The days that followed had a different texture than the weeks before them. Less shock, less silence. The work had its own momentum now, and Nita moved inside it the way she always moved when the numbers were talking to her clearly, steadily, without wasted motion. Theo's team coordinated the acquisition bid from his firm's side. Nita supplied the analysis, revised rent roll projections, a full deferred maintenance breakdown for each of the 4 properties, and a purchase price that reflected exactly what the portfolio was worth in its current condition, not what Desmond's people believed they could still command. The offer was structured through Nita's new firm as the named operating partner, with Theo's fund listed as the capital source. Clean, professional, and entirely routine on its face. Nothing in the paperwork named Nita Coleman. Her new firm's name appeared on every page instead. Desmond's team would see a private equity buyer with a credible portfolio and a competitive bid. They would see a closing meeting. They would see a path to liquidity on assets that had become a liability. They would not see her coming. Theo called on the 3rd day to confirm. Desmond's counsel accepted the meeting, he said. Closing is scheduled for next Thursday. His 2 remaining investors will be there, his lawyer, his CFO. A brief pause. He'll be there himself. He doesn't know the buyer's representative. Good, Nita said. She hung up and went back to work. Yolanda filed on a Wednesday. She did it in order, methodically, the way she did everything. Not rushed, not careless, each document exactly where it needed to be before the next one moved. First, the civil fraud filing against Desmond Coleman, documenting the 3-year history of asset diversion through the Shell LLC, including the transfers that had funded the apartment lease under Brianna Voss's name, and the transfers that had quietly covered the anniversary trip Desmond once claimed they couldn't afford. 11 years of marital finances picked apart line by line. The flash drive had given them the backbone. Yolanda had built the rest. Second, the amended filing against Patricia Coleman, naming her as a knowing participant based on her original witness signature and the document alteration attempt caught in the county's own timestamp records. The amended filing included both versions of page 4, side by side, with a legal declaration from Yolanda attesting to the discrepancy. Patricia had tried to erase herself. The county's system had kept a copy of what she'd erased. Third, the civil suit naming Brianna Voss for her operational role in structuring the concealment, the drafted operating agreement, the software licenses used to mask the paper trail, the bookkeeper's signed statement detailing the exchange. Brianna hadn't been a girlfriend who looked the other way. She had been a co-architect. The filing said so plainly. Yolanda printed confirmation receipts for all 3 and set them in a single folder. That night, Nita sat at the kitchen table alone. Yolanda had gone to bed early. The apartment was quiet. The city outside the window was doing what cities do at midnight, humming low, indifferent, lit up in ways that had nothing to do with anyone's pain or plans. Nita had the full evidence folder open in front of her. She went through it from the beginning. Not because she was nervous, not because she needed to check anything. She went through it because she had earned the right to sit with it quietly, to know exactly what it contained, to understand the full weight of what she was carrying into that room tomorrow. The LLC formation documents, the 3-year transfer history, Patricia's original signature on page 4, the amended version with that signature erased, the timestamp discrepancy, the bookkeeper's statement, Brianna's fingerprints on the operating agreement, the settlement offer Desmond had sent framed as generous, calling her contributions informal. She read that word again. Informal. She closed the folder. She set it by the door next to her bag, where she would not forget it in the morning. Then she stood, turned off the kitchen light, and walked to the doorway of Yolanda's room. "Yo," Yolanda stirred. "Tomorrow," Nita said. Her voice was calm, flat and sure, like ground that had been tested and held. "They all find out I was watching the whole time." Theo's conference room was on the 14th floor, high enough that you could see a long stretch of Atlanta's skyline through the glass wall on the far side. The buildings caught the morning light cleanly. The sky was pale and wide. Nita arrived at 8:15. The meeting wasn't until 9. She wanted the room first. She set her bag on the chair to her left, placed the evidence folder on the table in front of her, and sat down. She didn't open the folder yet. She straightened it once, lining it up with the edge of the table, and then she folded her hands and looked out at the city. She had sat in rooms like this dozens of times. She had built the decks that were presented in rooms like this. She had run the numbers, prepared the talking points, coached Desmond on the questions investors would ask. She had sat beside him, or behind him, or outside in the hallway, answering emails while he took the credit inside. Not today. Theo came in at 8:40, coffee in hand, and gave her a single nod. No speech, no encouragement. He understood what this was, and what it didn't need from him. He took his seat at the head of the table and opened his own folder. His associate brought in a second set of printed copies and stacked them at the far end of the table. The acquisition documents, the bid terms, all of it clean and in order. At 8:55, she heard voices in the hall. She recognized one of them immediately. Desmond walked in talking. That was how he always entered a room, mid-sentence, mid-laugh, projecting ease the way other men projected cologne, filling the space before he'd finished crossing into it. His lawyer came in behind him, briefcase in hand, already scanning the room with the flat, professional alertness of someone billing by the hour. Behind them, a CFO Nita didn't recognize. And then, last through the door, Patricia, moving carefully, a silk blouse buttoned to the collar, her handbag held in both hands. Then Desmond saw her. The sentence stopped. It just stopped. The laugh drained out of his face the way color drains when someone gets bad news. He stood in the doorway for one full second, and in that second, Nita watched him understand. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. The buyer's representative, her name on the firm, the room arranged around her. She did not smile. She didn't need to. Have a seat, Theo said pleasantly. Desmond's lawyer touched his arm. They sat. Patricia settled slowly into a chair near the end of the table. She didn't look at Nita directly. Her hand stayed folded over her handbag in her lap, knuckles pale. Brianna had come in as company staff, no title announced. Seated one chair removed from Desmond's lawyer, a notepad in front of her, professional composure on her face, like something she'd practiced in a mirror that morning. She looked once at Nita and then looked at the table. I'd like to begin, Nita said. Her voice was even. No theater in it, just a woman in a room, starting a meeting. She opened the folder. She walked Desmond through it first. She placed the Shell LLC formation documents in front of him. Page 1, the entity name, the registered address, and then the 3-year transfer history, printed in columns, clean and legible. She set a second sheet beside it, Coleman Build Group's operating account records, with the matching withdrawals highlighted in a pale yellow that looked almost gentle against the numbers it marked. 3 years, she said. Not 14 months. The entity has existed for 3 years. These are the transfers. These are the amounts. This is where they went. Desmond's lawyer leaned in. Desmond himself didn't move. She set down the lease document next. The apartment, Brianna's name on the line. Marital assets, Nita said. Diverted for 3 years. She let the documents sit there. She didn't elaborate. The numbers were articulate enough. Then she turned to Patricia. She did it without drama, without heat. She simply shifted in her chair and placed 2 sheets in front of Desmond's mother, side by side. Page 4 of the original LLC formation document, Patricia's signature visible in the lower right corner, dated 14 months ago, her name printed clearly beneath her own handwriting. And beside it, page 4 of the amended version. The same page, the same corner, the signature gone. Blank, as if it had never been there. This is the original, Nita said. This is what was filed with the county. This is your signature, Patricia. She touched the left sheet. Then she touched the right. This is the version your son's attorney submitted after the fraud filing was initiated. The county system logged both. The timestamp on the amendment is dated 4 days after Yolanda filed. Patricia's jaw tightened. She did not speak. Your signature was on the original for 14 months. Nita said, you knew what the entity was. You knew what it was funding. And when it became a liability, you tried to remove yourself from it. She paused. The record says otherwise. She let a beat of silence land. Then she turned to Brianna. She set the bookkeeper's signed statement on the table. Brianna looked at it. Her composure held, but just barely. A small tightening around her eyes, a stillness that was too careful to be natural. You drafted the operating agreement for the LLC, Nita said. You used your marketing department's software license to run the paperwork through a channel that looked like a vendor account. You did this in exchange for a verbal promise of a 15% partnership stake. She set one more sheet on top of the statement, a copy of the operating agreement itself, with the metadata intact, tracing the file's creation back to Brianna's department credentials. That's not a coincidence. That's not a girlfriend who didn't ask questions. That's authorship. Brianna's eyes dropped to the table. You didn't stumble into this, Nita said, her voice still level. You built part of it, on purpose, and you did it with the skills this industry gave you, in exchange for a stake that was never going to be real, because it was built on assets that were never legally his to promise. Silence held the room. Desmond's lawyer set down his pen. He looked at Theo first, then at the folder in front of Nita, then at the stack of documents his client had just been walked through, one quiet page at a time. I'd like to request a brief recess, he said. His voice was careful, professional, the voice of a man recalculating. Nita closed her folder. She picked it up, slid it into her bag, and pushed back her chair. She stood, straightened her jacket once, and walked to the door. She didn't look back. She left all three of them sitting there, in a room they thought they'd controlled, with the documents spread out in front of them like a table she had spent 2 years setting. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. A filing here, a phone call there, a name disappearing from a website. Nita and Yolanda tracked it the way you track a storm after it's already hit. Not watching it happen, but walking through what it left behind. Yolanda kept a running document, dates, filings, sources. She updated it every few days and shared it with Nita without comment, the way a doctor hands over test results and lets the numbers speak. The investors were first. 3 of them pulled out within 10 days of the filing. 2 more followed the week after. Nita knew most of their names. She had built the decks that originally brought them in. Slide by slide, projection by projection, hours of work Desmond had stood up and presented as his own thinking. Now those same investors were reading fraud allegations tied to the company they'd backed, and they were doing what investors do when the foundation cracks. They left. Coleman Build Group's remaining contracts transferred, cleanly, legally, exactly as the acquisition structure had been designed, to Nita's firm. The distressed properties followed. There was no drama in it. It was just paperwork moving from one column to another. By the end of the month, Coleman Build Group no longer existed in any meaningful sense. The name was still filed with the state, but the money was gone, the contracts were gone, and the people were gone. Desmond filed for personal bankruptcy 22 days after the closing. Yolanda texted Nita the filing number with no other message, just the number and the date. Nita read it once. Then she set her phone face down on her desk and went back to the acquisition analysis she'd been running that morning. Patricia's consequences came more slowly, and they cut differently. The settlement named her as a knowing party to the fraud. Her minority stake, the one she'd been so careful to protect, the one she'd tried to quietly erase her signature to preserve, was stripped from her entirely in the resulting agreement. She received nothing from it. The asset she had bought her silence to protect turned out to be worth exactly what her son's promises were worth. But the sharper thing, the thing that Nita heard about through a cousin of Desmond's, who still called occasionally, wasn't the legal settlement. It was the family. Once the document alteration attempt became known, not publicly but among relatives, the kind of quiet knowing that spreads through a family like water through a wall, something shifted. Patricia had spent 63 years managing appearances. She had hosted dinners and organized gatherings and steered conversations away from anything that might make the Coleman name look small. Her whole social life was built on that architecture. And then the architecture gave way. The invitations slowed, then they stopped. Her own siblings, who had watched the amended filing story get explained carefully by a family member with enough legal literacy to understand what document alteration meant, stepped back from her in the measured, devastating way that respectable families have of handling someone who embarrassed them. Not loudly, not cruelly, just gone, unavailable, busy. Nita didn't feel satisfaction exactly when she heard that. She felt something quieter, a recognition. Patricia had spent years performing family loyalty while protecting herself. Now she had neither the performance nor the protection. Brianna was terminated the same week the civil suit was filed. No severance announcement, no industry farewell post. Her name simply disappeared from Coleman Build Group's website on a Tuesday. The same day, Yolanda confirmed the termination paperwork had been processed. The 15% partnership stake, the thing she had drafted shell company documents for, the thing she had run paperwork through disguised vendor channels for, the thing she had helped build the concealment structure for, never materialized. It had never been real. It had been a verbal promise from a man who had nothing left to promise. What did materialize was her name in the civil filing. The metadata from the operating agreement, the bookkeeper's signed statement, all of it attached to a case that was now part of the public record in Fulton County. Real estate was a small industry in the city. People talked, they searched. A firm considering a hire would find her name, and they would find that case number attached to it, and they would keep looking at other candidates. Nita didn't celebrate that either. Brianna had made a choice. She had used real skills to do real damage, and she had done it knowingly, and the record now said so. That was consequence, not revenge. Consequence. There was a difference. The final settlement confirmation landed in Nita's inbox on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the closing. She read it at her desk, the same small, clean desk in the corner of her firm's new office space, a sublease in Midtown she'd signed the month before. The document was 4 pages. She read all 4. Then she closed her laptop. She sat still for a moment. Not emotional, not triumphant. Just finished with that particular piece of work. Then she pulled up the acquisition file she'd been working on for the past 3 weeks, a mixed-use property in Buckhead, undervalued by a seller who didn't understand what it was sitting on. And she kept going. 2 years. That was all it had taken. Nita stood in the entryway of the house and let the silence settle around her. The ceilings were tall, 14 feet in the foyer, higher in the great room beyond. The floors were pale limestone, cool and smooth under her shoes. Morning light came through the tall windows in long, flat panels, the kind of light that makes an empty room feel like it's holding its breath. She had closed on the property 48 hours ago. The paperwork was done. The keys were in her hand. The moving trucks wouldn't arrive until noon. So right now, for a few hours, it was just her. She walked slowly. No rush. No checklist. The great room opened to the left of the foyer. Wide, quiet, smelling faintly of fresh paint and stone. She crossed it and stood at the center, her footsteps echoing just slightly with each step. The sound was unfamiliar. She was used to offices, conference rooms, the low hum of other people's buildings. This was different. This was hers. She moved through the kitchen next. White oak cabinetry, a long island of veined marble, windows that looked out onto the back terrace and the grounds beyond. She had analyzed this property for 6 weeks before making the offer. She knew the square footage, the comparable sales, the lot's potential, the seller's motivation. She had built the acquisition case herself, line by line, the same way she had once built the decks that funded Coleman Build Group, while Desmond stood at the front of the room and took the applause. The difference was that this time, her name was on everything. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Yolanda, you closed on a $30 million house. I need you to sit with that for a full minute before you start analyzing the next one. Proud of you doesn't cover it. Love you. Nita smiled. Small and real. She typed back, I'll give it 2 minutes. Then she slid the phone into her pocket and kept walking. She thought about the suitcase. She didn't think about it often anymore. Not the way she used to, in those first weeks at Yolanda's apartment, when it had sat by the guest room door like a symbol of everything that had been taken from her. But here, walking through these empty rooms, it surfaced for a moment. The weight of it. The specific quiet of driving away from a house she'd helped pay for, in a car she owned outright, only because she'd handled all the paperwork herself. With $3,000 in a personal account Desmond had apparently forgotten existed. He had called it nothing. She understood now that he had meant it. He had genuinely looked at 11 years of her work. The investor relationships, the financial systems, the contracts she had structured, and the decks she had built, and the numbers she had kept clean. And he had seen nothing. Not because it wasn't there, but because he had never had the ability to see it. He needed to believe he was self-made. Which meant he needed her to be invisible. And she had let him for a long time because she had confused keeping the peace with being valued. She didn't carry bitterness about that anymore. Bitterness was heavy, and she had learned to travel light. What she carried instead was clarity. The back hallway led her through a study, built-in shelves, a wide desk positioned to face the window, and then out through a set of glass doors onto the terrace. She stepped outside. The terrace was long and wide, paved in the same pale limestone as the foyer, running the full rear length of the house. Beyond it, the lawn sloped gently downward toward a row of mature oak trees at the property line. The morning was quiet. Early spring in Atlanta, the air still cool enough to be comfortable, the sky an even pale blue without a single cloud to interrupt it. This was the neighborhood Desmond had once pointed to while driving past it. She could still remember the date, a Sunday afternoon, maybe 5 years into their marriage, and had said, half to her and half to himself, that people like them didn't end up there, that it wasn't for people who were still building, that she should stop looking at properties they had no business looking at. She had said nothing at the time, filed it away without knowing why. Now she knew why. She stood at the edge of the terrace, both hands loose at her sides, looking out over the lawn and the oaks and the quiet of the morning. Theo was flying in Thursday for a partner meeting. Yolanda was coming for dinner on Saturday. The movers would be here in 3 hours. She exhaled once, slow and full. Then she said it quietly, to the yard and the trees, and no one else in particular. I built this. A pause. Every square foot of it is mine. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day.